6 weeks ago, this man, Mark Dixie, was convicted of the brutal murder of Sally Ann Bowman. His appalling acts shocked the nation.
We describe it as a frenzied knife attack, but a controlled frenzied knife attack. This is a highly dangerous individual who's committed the most awful murder.
Savage, cruel, self-serving beast.
Tonight, in a Crimewatch special, we tell the remarkable story of how police caught him.
There isn't a second in the day I don't think of her.
In the early hours of a Sunday morning, 2.5 years ago, the body of 18-year-old aspiring model Sally Ann Bowman was found right here. She'd been brutally stabbed and sexually assaulted just yards from her own front door. That evening, Sally Ann went out drinking in Croydon with one of her 3 older sisters. At the end of the night, she convinced her boyfriend of 2 years, Lewis Sproston, to leave his friends, pick her up and take her home. But when he arrived, Lewis was far from pleased.
That mug toad on my forehead.
I had no other way of getting home. Don't start.
Don't start.
What took you so long?
Took me so long. Get in.
It's freezing.
Why didn't you call a cab like any normal person?
What's the problem? Would you rather I was
I'm not a
stranded?
taxi service, am I?
I didn't say you were.
Unbelievable.
Our relationship was good, but we did have quite a few arguments and that because we were both stubborn and argumentative. But we would always get back together and we would have always been together in my view, in my opinion. Me and Sally, and just generally doing what me and Sally always done, just arguing, making up, laughing, play fighting, just messing about. And but that was perfectly normal for us to be out at them times in the car.
Lewis and Sally Ann sat in the car for around an hour and 40 minutes. At about 4:10, Lewis had had enough of their arguing and drove off, leaving Sally Ann alone in the street, just 10 yards from her front door.
I just wish I could have walked her to her front door like sometimes I have done. I always go over the what ifs, or like what if I took her back to my house, and it does affect your everyday life, but it's just hard knowing that I'll never be able to like spend another day with Sally.
Several neighbours heard Sally Ann's screams. But dismissed them as either a simple domestic dispute or the cries of foxes, a common enough sound in that area at night. But when they looked out of their windows, they saw nothing suspicious. As they returned to their beds, the killer went even further. He had intercourse with her body as she lay dead or dying. Sally Ann lay exposed and undiscovered on her driveway until 6:30 a.m, when her neighbours began to rise.
I got the phone call early part of the morning, about 9 o'clock, to say that a young girl had been murdered. At that time, didn't know her name, but murdered in South Croydon. It was clear from the first officers on the scene to the detectives who turned up, this was going to be a horrific murder. You know, it was clear that she'd been stabbed a number of times. It was clear that she'd been bitten a number of times. There was no way, because of the nature of the scene itself, that we wanted the residents to see Sally. So what we often do in these circumstances is we do a Polaroid, and the photograph was shown to one of the occupants who identified the girl as Sally Ann Bowman.
I was woken up with a knock on the door. I looked out the bedroom window and saw 2 policewomen in uniforms and a guy in a suit. So obviously went downstairs, opened the door, and the gentleman in the suit said, "Are you Mrs. Bowman?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have a daughter called Sally Ann?" And the first thing I said was, "What have they done now?" Because I knew the sisters had been out together. And he said, "Can we come in?" So I said, "Yep." And as I walked round into the lounge, I hadn't even sat down, and the next thing I knew, he just said, "She's been killed, stabbed to death." And I just remember screaming. And as I looked round, my oldest daughter, Danielle, had come into the room, and she was literally sliding down the living room door onto the floor.
It's kind of a disbelief thing that just goes completely through you. Even though, you know, Linda's told me, a police officer told me, it's total disbelief. You don't want to believe it.
The rule of thumb is that I will always tell the family everything unless there is a very good reason not to tell them a specific detail. I'd made the personal decision that it was going to be me who was going to tell them the full horrific nature of what had been done to Sally. It's probably a moment that will live with me. I'm sure it's a moment that will live with Sally's family, to hear what's happened to your 18-year-old daughter, someone who's just turned 18. Not a pleasant experience for anybody to hear that. Truly, truly awful.
Sally Ann had been stabbed several times, principally in the neck and abdominal area. So savage were the stab wounds that in 3 places the knife blade passed right through her body, entering at the front and exiting at the back.
We describe it as a frenzied knife attack, but a controlled frenzied knife attack. The injuries that Sally sustained, not just the stab wounds, some of which went through the body, but also the defensive injuries, some of the worst defensive injuries that I've ever seen. A severe one to her hand where she'd undoubtedly put her arms up to protect herself. But then the sexual attack as well, and everything suggests that was after she had been killed. It was the scale of the horrific indignities that were performed on Sally's body.
Just incredible pain. Crying, shouting, wanted to get out of the house, wanted to get to Sally. Myself and Sally's next sister up, Michelle, were took to the mortuary, which was 2 minutes from my front door. And I was taken into this room. I wasn't allowed to touch her or hold her or kiss her, just talk to her through the glass. And I could just hear Michelle sobbing and screaming at me to wake her up, begging me to wake her up.
In the initial hours and days of the investigation, suspicion inevitably fell on Sally's boyfriend, Lewis.
As an investigator, you look at who is admitting to be with the victim immediately prior to their death, or who's got a special close relationship. Lewis fitted the bill on both those points. He admitted being at the scene, and he admitted having arguments, which was supported by witnesses outside her address. But over the 4 days he was in police custody, it was quite clear to us that he was not responsible.
The swab that had been taken from Sally's neck, from the bite marks to her neck, which was taken at the crime scene before the body was moved. On the Wednesday, so this is 4 days into the investigation, I had a phone call from the forensic scientist, and she basically told me there is good and bad news. The good news is you have a match to the DNA profile from your crime scene. The bad news is that profile wasn't Lewis Sproston.
With Lewis eliminated, all the evidence suggested that Sally Ann had been killed by a stranger, and police soon discovered that she may not have been his first victim that night. 40 minutes before the murder, in nearby Sanderstead Road, a woman on her way home had pulled over to make a phone call.
Look, I'm so sorry. I am going to make it, but the car's giving me real trouble.
He looked normal. He looked a nice young lad. I looked down and I saw a knife. And then he just looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry." And that's when he took the knife and he raised it up. And I just followed the knife going up in the air, and I looked up and I watched it come down on me.
I'm sorry.
He hit me twice on the head and he cut me across the face. And I then eventually put my hands up to protect my face, and he cut me across the knuckle.
Luckily, just at that moment, a taxi cab came into view, and the attacker was forced to flee.
I'm very lucky. Things could have ended up an awful lot worse for me. The one emotion I'd say is I feel is guilt. And I wonder if Sally Ann's family look upon me and think that if she died that night, then he wouldn't have attacked again. And I feel guilty that I survived and somebody else didn't.
This is a highly dangerous individual who's committed the most awful murder, and the public are at risk. And there was an overwhelming decision from all of us that we had to do a big media appeal and let the public know the sort of person that we were looking for.
Police hunting the killer of a teenage model have said they could be looking for a serial sex attacker.
Over the next few weeks, Stuart Cundy was rarely off our screens.
You believe that you're hunting a serial sex attacker?
I'm seeking the public's assistance.
One of the outlets Stuart turned to was Crimewatch, where Sally Ann's last known movements were reconstructed.
I would urge anybody who has any suspicion about someone they know, call into police or call in here tonight. We'll be treated in confidence. We could never articulate in any appeal the full nature of the injuries that Sally Ann had suffered. But through the reconstruction, I was thinking of provoking that one person who might have that one bit of suspicion about someone they knew or their neighbour, and who was only ever going to take that one phone call.
Police turned their attention to previously unsolved sexual attacks. The DNA found on Sally Ann's body matched that found after a sexual assault at a phone box in nearby Purley in 2001. But they still didn't have a name. So the police had to embark on a massive process of elimination.
We had a reasonable description. He was a white or a light-skinned male. We had an approximate age between 20 to 40. And then we had the local connection. 2 known attacks, plus the woman who was attacked earlier on the night, all in a very small area of Croydon.
Police had a matrix of some 22,500 names to work with. They launched an enormous house-to-house operation of around 6,000 homes in the area around Blenheim Crescent, trying to account for all of the young men matching the description who were staying in the area on the night of the murder.
We have so many techniques identifying people through forensics, but there is no substitute for knocking on people's doors and finding witnesses, and also finding potential suspects.
They also launched one of the biggest voluntary DNA screening processes in Met Police history. Local men were invited to volunteer their own DNA to help police whittle down the numbers. Over a 2-week period, nearly 800 men came to be swabbed, and every day it was taking place, Linda Bowman and Sally Ann's sisters were there.
You don't realise the effect it has had on the outside world. You know, how many hearts have been broken through this, until you go somewhere like that and you see people that come up and they shake your hand and they touch you on the shoulder, and just the kindness from members of the public that, you know, didn't even know Sally, didn't know us as a family. It was just amazing. It was a really nice, warm feeling that people out there do care and they do want to help.
As the weeks of investigation turned into months, the clamour to find the killer remained enormous. Sally Ann's image was rarely off our screens and out of our newspapers. For the detectives, the pressure was huge.
Draining, physically, mentally and emotionally. The investigation, and a lot of the team know, it did become an obsession for me. I wanted to make sure that we caught the person who murdered Sally before he attacked again, and that was always one of the biggest concerns. If he's done this to Sally, what might he do to the next person?
I was always promised by everyone in the squad that they would get him, one way or the other. Everyone was fantastic, and you know they kept the spirits up. But you do have the thing in the back of your head: is he ever going to be caught? You know, is he going to get away with this?
But luck was about to run out for Sally Ann's killer. A totally unconnected event was to reveal his identity. 9 months after the murder, 35-year-old chef Mark Dixie went out with friends to a Surrey pub to watch England in the World Cup. It was an afternoon that would change the lives of everyone involved in the Sally Ann Bowman case.
What's your problem?
I haven't got a problem.
What's your problem? You haven't got a problem. So you spilled my drink, all right? Oh, Mark!
The fight spilled into the street, within full view of local community officers. Mark Dixie was arrested for assault and taken to Crawley Police Station. As is standard practice, he was processed and swabbed for DNA. At the time, police thought Dixie was responsible for nothing more than a simple pub fight. They had no idea how important this DNA sample would prove to be. It was sent to the Forensic Science Service for analysis. 12 days later, the results came back. It was a perfect match for the DNA found on Sally Ann's body.
Gov.
Up until this point, Dixie's name had never come up in connection with this inquiry.
I think probably the first thing that probably went through my mind was, thank God. 9 months has been a long time for everyone connected to Sally Ann or to the investigation. And then it's the acceleration of, we now know who he is, we now need to find him. Who is Mark Dixie?
But Dixie was no longer in custody. He hadn't been charged and had been released hours after the swab was taken. Police needed to find him, and quickly.
It was so important to get as much information about him as possible. Where did he live? Where did he work? Was he married? Did he have any children? Where was he going to be so we could arrest him? Lads, we're on.
The team quickly discovered that at the time, Dixie was at work inside a pub kitchen in Crawley. But that presented police with a big problem.
He had knives, cleavers, pots of boiling water, anything he could use as a weapon in a kitchen.
We then had to make a decision of how we're going to arrest him safely.
They needed to lure Dixie out of the kitchen. 2 officers were sent inside, the plan being to get the pub manager to summon Dixie to the office. But before police could lay the trap, Dixie stumbled right into their hands.
I didn't want him to get back into the pub because we would have lost control of him then. I didn't want to run at him because he would have realised that we were police officers. He could have run inside the pub, taken a hostage and caused injury to anybody there.
Mark Dixie.
He looked at me and I told him he was being arrested for the murder of Sally Ann Bowman.
Whilst he was being restrained, I actually had to place my hands on his chest and I could feel his heart. And it didn't miss a beat. It was no change in his heartbeat. It was chilling, the fact that there was no reaction from him.
This is Mark Dixie being processed at Sutton Police Station. He's still wearing his chef's whites.
Tell me your full name. Mark Philip Dixie.
The person to the right of Dixie is in no way connected to him. She's his designated appropriate adult. These are volunteers from the local community, brought in to interviews to ensure they're conducted fairly and that each suspect knows their rights. It was vital that the interviewing officers remained objective.
Obviously you're going in there and you're sitting opposite someone who has committed such a horrendous crime. You've seen the photos of what he had done to Sally, and it is hard not to be emotional, but you've got to ensure that you do your job properly.
Dixie answered no comment to every question put to him.
Tell me what you know about the murder.
No comment.
Were you there at the time of the murder?
No comment.
He was the same throughout, and that was one of the worst bits. He showed no emotion whatsoever.
She's received an injury to her hand, which tells us that she's grabbed hold of the knife while she's being attacked.
He viewed that photo for what appeared to be a considerable amount of time, looked at the ground, and again, no comment. And as soon as he did that, I knew he had committed that offence.
Dixie was charged with the murder later that night. But the work was far from over. To get it through court, the police needed to find out everything about him. Dixie had been born in Streatham in 1970. By the age of 14, he was living in care. A father of 3, at the time of his arrest, he had split from his partner and was living in a room in the pub in which he was working. Friends described him as a larger-than-life character who was the life and soul of the party. Startlingly, no one who knew Dixie thought there was anything strange about him. The evidence all pointed towards Dixie. His DNA was all over both the crime scene and Sally Ann's body. His fingerprint was found in blood on the back of her stiletto shoe. But police needed to understand why and how Dixie had ended up here in Blenheim Crescent on the night of the murder. It was Dixie's 35th birthday. Around 7 p.m. that evening, Dixie and two friends, Vicky Chandler and Diane Glasborough, arrived at the Windsor Castle pub on the Brighton Road in South Croydon to meet some of their mates. Over the course of the evening, Dixie, a recreational drug user, had 2 lines of cocaine and drank several pints. But witnesses described him as being lucid and stable, and by no means out of his head.
All of a sudden he sees a dorsal fin. Well, he doesn't know if it's a shark or a dolphin, so he starts swimming like that. So he starts swimming, and he gets like, do I go back to the peddler or do I go to the yacht?
Dixie's then partner had refused to come out and help him celebrate. According to his friends, this seemed to upset him. For a time, he became uncharacteristically quiet and withdrawn.
You all right? Yeah, I'm fine. What are you talking about?
At closing time, Dixie and the girls left the pub and decided to return to Vicky's flat in nearby Avondale Road to carry on drinking. Avondale Road is just 2 streets away from Blenheim Crescent, where, a little over 5 hours later, Sally Ann Bowman would be murdered.
When we got back to the flat, Mark was cheerful and we had normal conversations about music and film and stuff.
Saturday night we're going to see this band and they're called the Village Idiots. Yeah, but I'm in the audience and they're really, really bad. While they're playing, I'm shouting out, "The Village People!" Yeah, start giving it all the... You really do.
Just after 2, me and Diane went to bed, leaving Mark lying on the sofa. Oh, Diane, it's 2:30. Should we get to bed? Let's go to bed. Mark, you're right here.
Yeah, I'll be all right, yeah.
Come on, let's go. Get. Night, Mark. Night.
Night.
When we got up the next morning, Mark was still lying on the sofa. I mean, I didn't notice anything out of character or different about him.
The girls had no idea that in the time since they'd last seen him sitting on the sofa, Dixie had committed one of the most shocking murders imaginable.
Oh, good night last night, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was all right.
With the girls tucked up in bed, this is what we now think happened next.
Yeah, night, Mark. Night.
Night.
The movements of Mark Dixie is something that we cannot factually say. There's only Mark Dixie himself that knows what he did. I think he went out definitely armed with a knife. That could have been a knife from the premises where he was staying in the flat. It could have been one of the knives that he already had. You know, he's a chef. He has his own knives.
Dixie claims he went out looking to score some drugs, but police have never believed this.
I believe he went out with the intention of attacking and sexually assaulting a woman. Whether it was the intent to kill or some other attack, who really knows?
He found his first victim in Sanderstead Road, chancing upon the woman who'd stopped to make her mobile phone call at around 3:30.
Look, I'm so sorry. I am going to make it, but the car's giving me real trouble.
I'm sorry.
But his assumption would then be, well, the police are going to be crawling all over this area. And I think he then went to where he felt comfortable, where he felt secure. And I think that was Blenheim Crescent.
Incredibly, Dixie had lived in Blenheim Crescent in 2003, some 2 years before Sally Ann moved there.
As he's got up there, he's heard voices or he's seen Sally and Lewis in the car. Sally was in the front passenger seat. It wouldn't take a rocket scientist for him to think, well, if the girl's in the passenger seat, she's obviously about to be dropped off.
See you later.
Lewis leaves at about 4:10 in the morning. Mark Dixie then launches into the frenzied attack. Once he's stabbed her, he leaves. Doesn't go far, probably goes back to his old front garden. And the reason that I think he leaves is that he's waiting to see, will anybody come out of the houses? Will any of the bedroom lights go on? You know, he's committed an attack in full view of neighbouring houses, and there are no bedroom lights come on. Nobody comes out of the house. What we know is that there was a garden tap at his old front garden. There is every possibility that Mark Dixie had already gone and washed off whatever blood he might have had on his hands before he went back to Sally, and that's when he committed the sex attack. Mark Dixie has then stolen various items from Sally Ann. He has stolen her underwear, he has stolen her handbag, her mobile phone, undoubtedly as trophies. And then back to the flat in Avondale Road as if nothing had happened.
Despite extensive efforts, police have never found a murder weapon. But it is possible that he simply washed it and returned it to the kitchen where he'd found it. He then returned to the sofa, ready to greet his friends when they awoke the next day.
Morning.
All right, birthday boy.
Yeah.
How'd you sleep?
Oh, not too good. How are you?
Do you want coffees, you two?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Morning.
Yeah.
Morning.
How you feeling? Oh, good night last night, though, weren't it?
Yeah, it was all right.
In the morning, he was exactly the same. There was nothing to suggest he'd done anything more than be on the sofa asleep all night.
When I got the phone call from the police, I was in denial that it could have been him. Because, I mean, he was in the flat, you know, less than 5 feet away from where we were sleeping. But when the police said they were 99% sure it was him, my body went into shock. I mean, I thought I was going to be sick.
It seems clear that no one really knew Mark Dixie. The man they all thought was the life and soul of the party was in fact a secret serial sex offender.
He's clearly got the ability to integrate into society and cover up the other side of his life. Every person that we spoke to, friends, family, all were surprised when they found out Mark Dixie was responsible for Sally Ann's death.
He just managed to deceive everyone around him as to what sort of a person he was.
As police dug deeper into his past, they discovered a shocking history. Dixie had a string of convictions for indecent assault and exposure, stretching back to his late teens. So police were convinced that the murder of Sally Ann couldn't have been his first violent attack.
The nature of the murder, the nature of the sexual murder of Sally, it doesn't take a police officer, it is common sense for anyone to think it would be so unlikely for that to be her first offence.
Detectives sent Dixie's DNA round the world to see if it matched any unsolved crimes on other countries' databases.
We know that between 1993 and 1999, Mark Dixie lived in Australia. In 6 years in Australia, I couldn't believe Mark Dixie hadn't done some awful atrocities out there.
So Dixie's DNA was compared to those found at the scenes of a host of serious unsolved sex crimes. And lo and behold, they found a match.
That was it.
That night, a Thai national studying at the university was on her own, house-sitting for a friend.
How's your brother? Mara, I call you back, okay?
What do you want?
Give me your money.
I have no money.
Give me your money.
Please, I have no money. I'm a student. I have nothing.
If you don't have any money, why don't you take your top off?
No! No!
The girl was stabbed several times in the back and then raped whilst she was unconscious. Miraculously, she survived. The attacker left traces of his semen on her underwear, but Australian police hadn't been able to match it to a name. Until now. The semen was Dixie's. He'd left the country 10 months after the attack.
There were so many striking similarities to what happened to Sally Ann. He stabbed this female 7 times. Sally Ann was stabbed 7 times. Sex had taken place while the victims were unconscious, and items of property had been taken as trophies.
Police had compelling evidence against Dixie. But one question remained. Why had he done it?
You have stabbed her a number of times, and then you've had sex with her.
Can we see the photo?
Was she still alive when you had sex with her? What was going through your mind?
Are you gonna take no responsibility for this in any way, shape or form?
No comment.
He has never admitted his part in this. This is someone who is arrogant in nature, has an aggressive sexual appetite, and on the night of Sally Ann's murder, it was his birthday. He was on the verge of breaking up with a partner. She'd refused to come out on his birthday, and I think he was quite angry.
What made Dixie do what he did? Was it straightforward sexual aggression? Was it dislike of rejection? Or the need to feel powerful? Whatever was happening in Dixie's mind, there can be no doubt that Sally Ann was powerless to do anything about it.
No one would expect to be attacked on your own driveway by a monster like Mark Dixie. By unfortunate circumstance, Mark Dixie was out on the prowl and came across Sally Ann and Lewis in that car and then took his opportunity. Never mind the nature of the attack on Sally, I think that's one of the most shocking things is that you know if it perhaps had been 10 minutes later, this would never have happened. It wouldn't have been Sally Ann. It might have been nobody.
Mark Dixie's trial began at the Old Bailey on the 4th of February this year.
He didn't make eye contact with any of us, not once. But I could hear sort of gasps from my girls, sort of seeing him. I think it's just gasps of disgust. My eyes were just fixed on him. I couldn't stop looking at him.
Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, his semen on her body, his fingerprint in her blood, he pleaded not guilty.
Mark Dixie's defence at court was preposterous. And that was the defence that he wasn't the murderer, that he wasn't there at the time of the murder. But he happened across Sally Ann, thought she was unconscious, not that she was dead, but thought she was unconscious, and he then took opportunity to have sex with Sally. He maintained that the only time he realised that she was dead was after the sexual attack, when he bit her, and there was no response. There was so much blood at the scene that anybody walking down that road would have seen Sally and realised that the nature of what had happened to her. He would have known that she wasn't just unconscious. He would have known when he touched Sally that she would have been cold.
It's my belief that he was getting gratification out of reliving what he had done, getting gratification about putting the family through the disgusting acts that he had committed.
When it comes from the person who's perpetrated a crime like that on someone you love, and he's telling you in words and in actions in front of you what he did, my God, you know, how low can a human being go to, even at this, you know, at this late stage, you know, at this 11th hour, still stand up there and make it even worse.
But the jury saw right through him. After just 3.5 hours, they found Mark Dixie guilty of Sally Ann's murder.
I think I just sort of uttered the words yes. It was just very emotional and tearful. I looked round at him in the box and he was just standing shaking his head in sheer disbelief. So, you know, how can you say yes? He absolutely convinced himself that he didn't do this. It's a sick human being.
For me, it was at last. You know, I wasn't denied that moment in time to hear those immortal words, to hear that we'd definitely got the right man. And it was a tremendous feeling of satisfaction and then relief at the same time. Mark Dixie was now no longer able to walk the streets of London and to commit another horrific attack as he'd done on Sally.
She got to, I think, about 9 when Linda and I split, which was that was a very difficult time. Not being around her every day, and I always had this idea in my head that I would make up when she was an adult. I would make up for the times when we couldn't have been together. And that's been taken now. So now what I'm left with is just the regret and the pain of knowing that I can never make up for the lack of me in her life and her in mine.
Would you expect to walk past the bedroom and just shout out, "Can you keep the noise down? You're too loud. Turn the volume down." And I was sitting there thinking just yesterday, the amount of times I used to scream upstairs, "No, it's too loud," or we'd have stupid arguments. You look back now and you regret every second of it. I'd never get over it. And certainly never ever sort of say goodbye to her. I couldn't do it. But there isn't a second in the day I don't think of her.
The impact of Mark Dixie's brutal and depraved acts will continue to be felt by all those involved for years to come. We may never know why he did what he did to Sally Ann. But thanks to one of the biggest police manhunts in recent times, he will now spend at least the next 34 years behind bars.